Welcome back to a special episode of To The Point on the first 100 days of the Modi government. In part one, we looked at areas, particularly the economy and foreign policy, where many believe the Modi government has made a strong start. We turn now to certain areas where perhaps people have deeper concerns. Dipankar Gupta, recently UP leaders like Lakshmikant Bajpai and Kalraj Mishra have made what sound very much like deliberate comments to arouse communal passion and create suspicion between Hindus and Muslims. Talk about rape, talk about love jihad. Does this sort of comment, particularly in a place where relationships between communities are fragile, worry you?
Of course it does. I think that it's absolutely dreadful. In fact, this tendency began before Modi was actually, sworn in as Prime Minister. A month before that, because his saffron followers realized that Modi was about to sweep the elections, and they came out of the woodwork and began to say all kinds of things. And Modi so far hasn't really reined them in. It is true he hasn't said anything himself. Maybe he thinks that it's a sideshow and it's not very important. I don't think Modi will ever, during his prime ministership, allow any communal conflagration to happen, because that is not in his interests. So he might just, consider these people to be old codgers who have to say a few things and so forth. But nevertheless, it creates a terrible atmosphere, and it does not do Modi any good to just stand by and let it happen. In fact, if Modi were to come out like he did in the Red Fort, come out and say that we cannot play identity politics, the more identity politics we play, the less time we have for development, I think he would really put an end to this kind of rubbish that goes on among his followers.
Gurcharan Das, I'm going to quote Lakshmikant Bajpai. Clearly alluding to Indian Muslims, he said, have they got the certificate to rape girls because they belong to a particular religion? He then went on to say 99.99% of the accused who rape are Muslims. Is it acceptable for the BJP UP president, and he's no ordinary person, to speak like this?
No, I think that's deplorable. It's totally wrong. And I agree with Dipankar that Modi is smart. And if he sees this stuff affecting his development agenda, he's going to take a step. I think right now he just sees it as an irritation of these people, and it's not in his style to kind of jump in like that directly. But I would say that this is not going to be. He will realize very quickly.
Shekhar, I want to bring you in on that particular point. Both Dipankar Gupta and Mr. Gurcharan Das would like to hear Modi speak out, but they're also giving him a little bit of time. They're saying it's not in his style to jump in immediately. Dipankar said maybe in due course he will say it. But the truth is that if he doesn't speak out, he ends up not only being contradicted by these people, but his own comments from the Red Fort when he talked about communal harmony, brotherliness and togetherness look hypocritical. So isn't there an onus on him to speak out and speak out quickly?
Well, absolutely, and that I would say is my biggest disappointment so far. I'm waiting for him to rise and say this is nonsense. So and so should not have said this. In fact, even snub one of these guys in public because they bring him no repute. In fact, they undo a lot of the repair work that he's done on his own image. And frankly, most of these people don't bring him any votes either, because if any polarization is required for him to win votes, that's taken place already. So nothing more needs to be done. I think if anything, he has to reach out to others. In fact, if you see the latest India Today opinion poll, it tells you that more Indian Muslims are today willing to vote for Modi than before. So in fact, he's got a virtuous movement in that direction. Why should he allow all these people to stall it?
Kiran Bedi, in part one, you were very outspokenly in praise of Mr. Modi, and understandably so. Now, do you think that on this critical issue, which is a moral issue, the Prime Minister's silence is not just inexplicable, but it comes close to being almost irresponsible?
Karan, I think the kind of attention Varanasi is getting from the Prime Minister, it's the Uttar Pradesh as a whole which needs his attention. I think he needs to spend time on it and give UP a whole plan including how do you deal with caste equations and how do you deal with communal factors. I think we are waiting for Prime Minister to give due attention and time to Uttar Pradesh as a whole, because if UP changes, India changes. If UP develops, India develops. So it's a very important part of his infrastructural success.
Okay.
Therefore, I think he's not had enough time, which includes reining in these kind of immature statements.
Mr. Birla, let me put it like this. Being Prime Minister of a country like India is not just a political job. At critical moments when the country is disturbed by what's happening, the Prime Minister needs to take a moral stand around which the country as a whole can rally. Now, you had that awful battering to death of a techie in Pune because he had a beard and people thought he was a Muslim. You had the Badayun rapes which shook the country. On both occasions, Mr. Modi was very, very late and slow in speaking out. Do you think Mr. Modi needs to learn a lesson that being Prime Minister is not just a political job? There are moments when, in fact, it's a moral job. You need to take a stand the country can rally around. Would you say he needs to learn that one lesson?
Actually, I'm going to answer your question from the side. See, if you believe in somebody, if you believe in your leader, as I do, I don't think it's our job to be double guessing his sense of timing. Because I'm pretty sure that Mr. Modi has a very clear mind and he will say what needs to be said when he believes it needs to be said. Having said that, and I'm also very clear that he believes in the old adage of the Mahabharata, where Krishna says कि शांति का मार्ग ही प्रगति का मार्ग है, उन्नति का मार्ग है. And I think he believes that, and I've heard some of the other speakers say that he's not taking his eye off the ball. He will say what he has to when he needs to.
Can I ask you a question?
And therefore it's not my
Can I
job
ask
to
you a
double
question?
guess. Yeah.
You call
Yeah.
him your leader, you say you want
Yeah.
to speak to the side, from the side. Many will think you've ducked my question. Are you scared to criticize your leader? Are you worried that as a top industrialist he may somehow be vengeful if you're outspoken? That it's diplomatic not to be critical when there's no need for it? I'm sorry I'm being a little blunt, but that thought will occur to many others, and I'm simply voicing a thought the audience may be asking itself.
See, the answer is much simpler than what you asked me, because despite my loss of hair, I'm actually fairly not very well versed in the complexities of what you've raised.
Okay.
And therefore, what I gave you was a very honest answer. It wasn't a duck.
Absolutely, and there's
wasn't
no
a duck.
way that I'm impugning your integrity. I was perhaps being a little mischievous, that's about it. Shekhar Gupta, let's come to a second issue.
Thank you.
Not moral, this time political, that perhaps is causing people concern, and maybe it's causing journalists more concern than others. The Rajnath Singh episode. Is this government really divided at the top? Or is that just journalistic perception and TV channels creating a story?
Look, in every government there are groups. In every political party there are groups. I'm sure there are in the BJP and the NDA government as well. And groups work at cross purposes. They jockey for power. It's a perfectly natural and normal thing. I think one reason you see a lot of rumor mongering around the BJP and BJP government, and there's a lot of folklore now, some minister having been called back and made to change out of jeans and t-shirt into something more formal on his way to the airport. There are many rumors. I think the whole scuttlebutt market is right now rife in Delhi. That always happens when you have a very strong leader and there is an information blackout around the leader. See, when Manmohan Singh was in power, there was very little rumor mongering around him, but there was rumor mongering around 10 Janpath and Mrs. Gandhi. When Indira Gandhi was in power, there were rumors all the time. So whenever you have this combination of a very strong leader and an information blackout, you have rumors.
Kabir Bedi, let me put the opposite.
And frankly, journalists should worry not so much about the rumors, they should worry about the information blackout. And I would say it's that much more challenging to be a government reporter these days.
Kabir Bedi, let me put that to you in a sense. One of the reasons why rumors gain currency, and there's no doubt that they've been spread even if they're not believable, is because this government is often silent. Not often, always silent. Ministers are reluctant to give interviews. The Prime Minister, who is a great communicator, no longer talks except occasionally. Do you think the government is making a terrible mistake? The great strength of Mr. Modi was his communication. Now his silence is allowing silly, footling rumors to gain currency. And secondly, when he doesn't communicate, people don't get onto the same wavelength as him. So is he wasting his own great skill by not using it and by keeping silent?
Possibly. I think one of the areas he really has to watch out for is his relations with the media. Now, you've got to understand that Modi has been burnt by the media. For 12 years following Godhra, they made it sound as though it was the only riot that ever happened. And even after he was cleared by a special investigative team of the Supreme Court, the hounding went on. However, he displayed great skills in using the media in his final push in the campaign. But the fact of the matter is that the media is a machine, it's an animal that needs enormous amounts of information to devour, and therefore, if you don't give them the information, rumor mongers will, the opposition will, other people will. Therefore, I think he needs to have a far more sophisticated policy of dealing with the media, not keeping them at arm's length, and not to repeat the mistake that cost the Congress this election, the arrogance of non-communication.
And you're suggesting that he's getting close to being arrogant in his non-communication. That's clearly what you're suggesting, aren't you?
No, not yet. Not yet. I think that right now he's just keeping the media at a certain arm's length, but I think it's doing him a disservice. Not taking media teams, for instance, to Brazil or Japan, etc., limits the amount of coverage of the enormous good he is doing. I mean, in Nepal, he won the country over to a man. How many people broadcast his speech nationally? While he was in Brazil, getting the presidency of the BRICS Bank, people were obsessing here with a journalist who had interviewed a terrorist in Pakistan. I mean, it was totally disproportionate because they were not being fed information. He needs to feed them information that they can use in the media.
Mrs. Bedi, you're very good at knowing how to handle the media yourself. You're very good at knowing where information needs to be given and where it needs to be withheld. With your own personal experience in mind, do you think that Mr. Modi is not handling the media well? Do you agree with the point that Kabir Bedi's made that if you don't feed this wretched beast, the beast will manufacture its own stories and who knows what they'll be?
I think Mr. Modi knows what he's doing. He knows how much to reach out and how much not to. And he's opened up all other channels of reaching out, whether it's web streaming, whether it's a Twitter in Japanese, whether it's a website to call for information, and also making speeches and declaring policies through, like for instance, the reach out to school children tomorrow, day after, on the Teacher's Day. Mr. Modi knows to calibrate, and he knows what he needs to do. I think he would be the best judge. I don't think any one of us are in a position to make any suggestion to him. He's proven so far a success and a wiser man, even in managing media. I would say, I would wait and watch. I would wait and watch and see how he alters if he does.
You may genuinely believe that none of us are in any position to make even a small suggestion to him, but let me assure you there'll be many journalists who will make small, big, medium and endless suggestions to him. And let me put the opposite now about the media to you. Is the media bowled over by Mr. Modi? Is there sufficient analytical criticism of him in the media and too much being swept off one's feet because of his majority, because of his charm, his sartorial elegance and all the rest? And I've been bringing it up myself. Are we swept off our feet by him?
I think to some extent that's correct. But you know, I'm not unhappy with the fact that there were too many voices in the UPA government. And I'm glad that we don't have the cacophony. And here,
do you like regimentation of message?
No. So I would personally think that it is Modi's, the point you made earlier, which is that he should have a fireside chat with the country periodically, so that people know where things are going, so that what Shekhar said, rumors are not created, and so on. So the silence is good to some extent because it shows people are working rather than talking.
Very quickly, Dipankar Gupta, I'm going to repeat that question to you. Because you're a sociologist, you don't just read the papers, you judge and think about what you read. Is the media bowled over by Mr. Modi? Are we swept off our feet? Are we dropping our critical faculties a little because we're fascinated by this man, his style, his oratory? And let's be honest, they're quite winning at times. So are we swept off our feet? Are we losing our critical faculties?
Well, yes, in a sense, probably the media is losing its critical faculty, but it's not entirely the media's fault. I think Mr. Modi is playing the media like a piano. He is making sure that the substance of what he does is not as important as the difference that he conveys between his government and the UPA. And because he's playing on the difference, there's a lot of symbolic richness in what he does. For example, when he went to Japan, he played the drums, he played the recorder, he cracked jokes, and all that stuff, and which is so different from what other prime ministers have done in recent memory. So what the substance of what he does somehow gets overshadowed by the brilliance of the difference that he portrays. And the media naturally picks that up, and so do the rest of us.
Okay.
You might say that he has entered the ring and he started swinging punches, which is true, but he's also leading with his chin, because he has a bullet train which can be easily, mapped. He has 100 cities which can also be easily ascertained. He has the Clean Ganga project, which again can be checked out quite clearly. So while he's there, trading differences, what is different between him and the rest, while he's there hitting big punches, is also true that he is all becoming vulnerable at the same time to some of the huge promises he's making to the people. I do hope, of course, at the end of the day, that all of us will be served well, but you wanted an assessment, well, here it is.
Let me put to you the sort of question editors love being asked, and you're clearly the sort of editor Mr. Modi will listen to. What is the one advice, the one lesson you would give him after observing his 100 days in power?
Well, that 100 days in power don't always last for 500 days. That adverse moments will come, slip-ups will happen, mistakes will happen, and don't take the media's general friendliness for granted, because media is waiting for a story. I have no evidence that this media is so friendly or so sold or so scared or so intimidated that it's getting stories that are really adverse to Mr. Modi but is not running them. This is the honeymoon period. So for when things start going wrong, or when realities of life start hitting a government in its midlife or around that time or before that, there should be sufficient communication with the media.
What's the one thing Mr. Modi can be most satisfied with when he looks back over the last 3 months?
Well, I think some of the things he's done in foreign affairs is really, I mean, the way he won
Not the economy, foreign affairs.
Yeah, well, economy I think it's going to take time. They're on the right track, but I think what was surprised everybody, how he won over Nepal is, I mean, I'm married to a Nepali, so I follow Nepali politics, and I can tell you the whole country was won over by him, something that no prime minister has ever achieved. That given the anti-India feeling that exists there, I mean, he made a huge difference.
Mr. Birla, you called him your leader. What is it that, in terms of economic advice, what is the one thing you'd like to see him do, and do quickly?
Well, number one, I just break that into two. Number one, he must keep on the implementation and the setting right the decision-making machinery of the country, which I think much of it can be achieved in 1 year. And number two, I think the biggest task before this government is starting at the ground level, the kind of expectations that have built up. I think this expectation management or management of reality will need some time to be spent on.
Okay, very quickly, Kabir Bedi and Kiran Bedi. Interestingly, both of you have the same surname. I've just realized it. I'm going to ask you questions and ask you to give me quick answers. We're running out of time. Kabir Bedi, the Congress party has been sharply critical of Mr. Modi's 100 days. It says this is non-fulfillment of promises, undermining of institutions, and promotion of a work culture nurtured by distress and fear. Is the Congress even partly right?
The Congress sounds like a crybaby whose lollipop has been taken away, which is the case. The fact of the matter is what they say right now, frankly, doesn't matter. Give Prime Minister Modi a break. He has brought optimism to the country. He has brought energy to the country. He's given us a sense of new direction, leadership, and the first 100 days haven't been bad at all. In fact, he's done some spectacular things in foreign policy and many other interesting things on the domestic. I salute him.
And you have every right to do so. Kiran Bedi, if the next 350 days are like the 100 that have ended, what will be the shape of India at the end of 5 years? A quick answer.
Prosperity, integrity, accountability, implementation, and hope and trust back. I think India will have recovered its lost prestige and status. I think we have a great future ahead.
And Mr. Modi, if he listens to you, would have a great speechwriter as well. I applaud you for putting it so effectively. Mr. Modi, for once, could not have done better. My thanks to all 6 of my guests for joining me. And if you have been, thanks for watching. Goodbye. Good night.